Good evening. I indeed saved the best for last. Kitty! I don't even remember what part this is. I'm going to say it's the 14th part. Sunshine. I could be entirely wrong. You should check the YouTube label. Who cares because it's more sunshine. What is this strange little book? I love it so much. So thank you, as always, Kitty, for supporting me on Patreon and in general. You're fantastic and awesome, and I'm so excited to read more of this. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So here we go. Scarier than vampires, I thought. Scarier than an affinity for vampires. An important distinction. Well, that was what she'd said, wasn't it? Wasn't what my mind contained was an affinity for vampires. She was fishing around in her cart and pulled out a package of fig carousels and another of chocolate pinwheels. I laughed. She smiled at me again. Which, she said, holding them out toward me. I hadn't had a pinwheel in 15 years, although the secret recipe for Sunshine's killer zebras was the later result of a 3-pack-a-week pre-Charlie's childhood. I pointed to the pinwheels. She tore open the packet, sat down, and offered it to me. Thank you, I said. She took one, too. We sat in silence for a while and did away with several more pinwheels. Thank you, I said again. Maud, she said. I'm Maud. I live there. She pointed to one of the old townhouses that surrounded the little park. I sit here often in warm weather. I found it's a good place for thinking. I like to believe Colonel Oldroy was a pleasant fellow, which is why the disagreeable thoughts seem to fall away if you sit here. Colonel Oldroy had been one of those military scientist bozos who spent decades locked up in some huge secret underground maze because whatever they were doing was so super classified that the existence of a lab to do it in was confidential information. It still wasn't public knowledge where his lab had been, but Oldroy got the credit, or the blame, for the blood tests Soft still used on job applicants. Before Oldroy, there was no reliable test for demon part bloods. Remember that demon is a hodgepodge word. A weir can't be a part blood. You either are one or you aren't. Anything else, anything alive that is, may be called a demon, although things like Perrys and angels will probably protest. Pretty much the first thing that Oldroy discovered was that he was a part blood. He'd retired before they had a chance to throw him out, and spent the last 20 years of his life breeding roses and naming them things like Lucifer, Mammon, Beelzebub, and Belphegor. Belphegor, under the less controversial name Pure of Heart, was a big commercial success. Mom had a pure heart in her backyard. Oldroy may not have had a very happy life, but it sounded like he'd had a sense of humor. I wondered if he'd had anything to do with synthesizing the drug that made part bloods piss green or blue violet but pass his blood test, or was setting up the bootleg mentor system. Sometimes you have help, I said. Sometimes people come along and offer you chocolate pinwheels. Sometimes, she said. I'm Ray, I said. Do you know Charlie's Coffee House? It's about a quarter-mile that way, I said, pointing. I don't get that far very often, she said. Well, sometime, if you want. You might like to try our killer zebras. There's a strong family resemblance. Tell whoever serves you that Sunshine says you can have as many as you can carry away to bring back to this park and eat. In the sunshine. Are you Sunshine then, too? I sighed. Yes, I guess I'm Sunshine, too. Good for you, she said, and patted my knee. That was a nice little exchange. I got home that night at about 9:30 and had a cup of cinnamon and rosehip tea and stared out at the dark and thought. There was at least one good result of my negative epiphany that afternoon in Oldroy Park. There seemed to me suddenly so many worse things that worrying about Con seemed clean and straightforward. Yeah, by comparison, I guess. He had saved my life, after all. Twice. Never mind the extenuating circumstances. I stood on my little balcony and remembered. I could not come to you if you did not call me. But if you called, I had to come. Constantine, I said quietly into the darkness, do you need me? You have to call me if you do. You told me the rules yourself. He'd said Bo was after us, and that Bo would make a move soon. I rather thought that soon, in this instance, meant a definition of soon that humans and vampires could agree on. Khan should have been back before now to tell me what was going on, what we were going to do, how far he'd got in tracing Bo. He hadn't. There was something wrong. Great, already. I'm already uncomfortable. I slept badly that night, but this was getting to be so usual that it was an effort to try to decide if the nightmares I'd had were the kind I should pay attention to or not. I decided that they probably were, but I didn't know what kind of attention to pay, so I wasn't going to. I went into work, turned my brain off, and started making cinnamon rolls and garlic rosemary buns for lunch. Then I made brown sugar brownies, Rocky Road Avalanche, killer zebras, and a lot of muffins. Then it was 10:30 and I had the lunch shift free. I had pulled my apron off and was about to untie my scarf when Mel's hand stopped me long enough for him to kiss the back of my neck. I shook my head and said, yes. We went back to his house together and spent some time on the roof. There's nothing nicer than making love outdoors on a warm, sunny day, and this late in the year I felt it was getting away with something too. Mel used to laugh sometimes right after he came, in this gentle, surprised way as if he'd never expected to be this happy, and then he'd kiss me thoughtfully and I'd hang on to him and hope that I was reading the signs right. That afternoon was one of those times. He'd wound up on top, which I admit I had slightly engineered since there was a bit of an autumnal breeze sticking around and it was nice and warm under Mel's body. His breath smelled of coffee and cinnamon. We lay there some time afterward. I loved that butterfly wings feeling of a hard-on getting unhard inside me. And while we lay there, I was all right, and the world was all right, and everything that might not be all right was on hold. And it was daylight, and with my treacherous eyes shut, I could lie there and feel the sunshine on my face. After a comfortable, rather dreamy lunch, he went downstairs to take apart or put together some motorcycle, and I went off to the library. I wanted to talk to Emile. She looked up from her desk, smiled faintly, and said, "I have a break in 40 minutes," and went back to whatever she was doing. I had to pass through the new shelves, where there was a book hysterically titled The Scourge of the Other. It was a good 2 inches thick. I considered stealing it and putting it through the meat grinder at Charlie's, but the library would only buy another one, and a detritus of ink and binding glue probably wouldn't do the quality of Charlie's meatloaf any good. I knew without picking it up that the chapters would have rabble-rousing headlines like "The Demon Menace" and "The Curse of the Were." I wasn't going to guess what noun was desperate enough for vampires. 4 months ago, I would have just scowled. Today, it gave me a hard knot and pit of stomach feeling. It was turning out I had a lot of other friends. Other, capitalized, other friends. And Con, of course, whatever he was. Con, are you all right? My tea was already steeping when I went back to the tiny staff kitchen to find a meal. "So, how did it happen?" I said. She didn't bother to ask how did what happen. "I knew about your softs at Charlie's because you told me about them. I told you so you wouldn't stop speaking to me because I seemed to like some guys who wore khaki and navy blue. That they were soft, that they were soft was supposed to help. They told the best other stories. I guess. I could have done without the one. Never mind. Anyway, so I recognized them when they came here. One day, Pat and Jesse asked if I'd come by the soft office someday for a chat. I hadn't realized you could feel surrounded by two people, you know? And what was I going to say? No? So I said yes. Then they asked me if I'd be interested in doing a little work for SOF, and of course I said no. And then they started working around to telling me they weren't so interested that I was a reference librarian as they were interested in what I was doing with Otherwatch and Beware. They seemed to know what I was doing at home, too. Before I totally freaked, Pat held his breath and turned blue. I said, "What's to prevent me reporting you?" And he said, "Because you're another one." I have no idea how they found out. Emile stopped. But she didn't stop like "End of the story" stop. "And?" I said. She sighed. "Ray, I'm sorry. They also said, because you're a friend of Sunshine's." There was no window in the little library staff kitchen. I wanted sunlight. What had my friendship to do with anything? She'd been working for SOF for almost 2 years. "And you didn't tell me?" Emile walked over to the door and closed it gently. I didn't want anyone to hear us either, but my spine started prickling with claustrophobia, or darkophobia anyway. "I'm sorry," said Emile. "It's only been since I've been working for them that have been able to start thinking of myself as other, as a part blood. The best way to pass is to believe in the role, you know? My parents know, of course, but they haven't made any attempt to find out where it comes from. None of my brothers had anything weird happen to them, so as far as I know, they don't know about me. I haven't told my family I'm SOF, and I hadn't told anyone I'm part blood. Who was I going to tell? Why? The only person who would have a right to know is the father of my children, and I'm not going to have children and pass this on. I hope none of my brother's kids, well, because I'd have to tell them then. I didn't say anything right away. "When did you find out?" "Yeah," said Emile, "right about the time I met you. You looked as lost as I felt. Then it turned out we got along, and did everyone but my mother and me assume that who my dad was public knowledge? It wasn't quite that bad." Oh, God. I looked at her. She said reluctantly, "It was maybe worse during the Voodoo Wars, but by then everyone knew you, and your mom had married Charlie. Charlie's family had lived in Old Town forever, and you were normal by context, you know? And then you had two dead normal little pests for brothers. Nobody ever caught you doing anything weird at school. You seemed just as fascinated as the rest of us with some of the Nagoos, I think it is, and blood axes and so on talked about magic handling. I don't deny that a few people looked at you a little sideways." I'd let my tea sit too long, but the bitterness in my mouth seemed appropriate. "You were into cooking, Ray, and a generation or two ago the Blazes were top dogs. Sure, were they? I thought. So many things my mother never told me. Although I couldn't really blame her for my avoiding reading GlobeNet articles that mentioned the Blazes. Could I? I'd wanted to be Ray Seddon. We still heard a little about them at the beginning of the wars, but then it's like what was left of them disappeared. So maybe you were genuinely normal, you know? Most people say that magic handling runs out in families sooner or later. The Softs didn't think so, I muttered. Disappeared. Beau's lot brought me a Blaze, and not just a third cousin who could do card tricks and maybe write a ward sign that almost works, but Onyx Blaze's daughter. Onyx Blaze, whose mother taught his daughter to transmute. How did the people who were looking at me sideways count those 1 or 2 generations? What else could my grand do? Had she done? Disappeared how? There's so many more questions now, and nobody gets more normal than your mom. True. I wouldn't think about how to thank her for my very well-embedded normalcy later. I would think, sorry. It might be difficult to choose between cyanide and garrote. Can we go outside, I said. The sun was behind a cloud, but daylight is still better than indoors. Emil, I want to ask you a favor. Done. Okay, thanks. It's what Soph wants me to do. Try and get some location fix on one of your creepy cosmails. But I want to do it somewhere that isn't behind proof glass. Excuse me. In daylight, said Emil. Well, okay, we'll do it at my house. My next afternoon off is Thursday. I'll find someone to swap with. It's not only the proof glass, is it? It's also Soph. You don't want to do it just because Soph tells you to. I nodded. I know they're the good guys and everything, but I know. Once I found out they were watching me, I changed the way I do some stuff. They are good guys, and I do work for them, and I don't mind much. But it's a little nomad for me. And I still have this silly idea that my life belongs to me. There were good reasons Emil and I were friends. I love that this relationship, as stressful as all this is to learn all of this stuff, I love that their relationship is still close. Like, they have a reason to be close. Anyway, I went home that night, stood on the balcony again, and said to the darkness, Constantine, are you all right? If you need me, call me to you. For a moment I felt something, like a twitch against your line when you're half asleep or thinking about something else. Maybe a fish, and it may be the current, but it may be a fish. I learned to fish because Mel taught me, not because I longed to impale small invertebrates on barbed hooks and rip hell out of piscine oral cavities and smother fellow oxygen breathers in an alien medium. The flicker itself made me think I was half asleep or thinking about something else, because I was straining after any sign whatsoever. It was gone again at once. Is he just restraining himself and not reaching out to her? Excuse me. Thursday afternoon wasn't flash ideal, but I managed. Polly was a little too not sorry to change his single weekly 4:30 in the morning shift for another afternoon that Thursday, and he hadn't made up the one he'd missed our last 13-day week yet either. I'd worry about just how not sorry he was later. Meanwhile, I got up at 3 a.m. to do a little extra baking, like I had a point to make. As I drank the necessary pint mug of blacker than the pit of doom tea to get me going, I stood on the balcony again, testing for quivers in the current. All I got was a stronger sense that there was something wrong. But I was good at feeling there was something wrong even when there wasn't, something I'd inherited from my mother, and there was nothing in this case but my own glangy unease to look at. There are advantages to driving an old wreck instead of a modern car. Wrecks bounce around and jerk at your hands on the wheel and help keep you awake. The charms in the glove compartment were more restless than usual, too. I think they were objecting to the driving. I hope that's what they're objecting to and not something else. By the time I got off work at noon, I felt it had been several years since I'd had any sleep, and I had a nap instead of lunch. I brought sandwiches in a bag, and Emil had a pot of tea waiting for me. It was another gray day, but Emil had pulled the combox table around so that the chair backed up against the window, which she had opened. What daylight there was fell on me as I sat there. There was a little wind that stroked my hair. Where do you want to start? Said Emil. With the bingo one from the other day, or do you want to start fresh? I hadn't thought about it. Good beginning. It was so hard to screw myself to do anything. The details got a bit lost. Who or what was I looking for? Con or Beau? Since I was doing it alone with Emil, I wasn't trying to make Pat and Jessie happy. So what was going to make me happy? Define happy. But if I found something on the other side of the real globe that Pat and Jessie would get all tangled up in negotiations with their local soft equivalents over, it might get them out of my hair. Finding Beau wasn't going to make me happy, but I didn't want to look for Con with anyone else around, even Emil, which left Beau, or the unknown. The unknown at the moment was unknown. Beau, on the other hand, was after me. Beau then, oh boy. Let's start with bingo. I'm nervous. I'm so nervous. Emil brought up the file, highlighted the Cosmail I wanted, and stepped back. Squinted at the screen. I could see the winking bar of highlighting, and the button was under my finger. I pressed. It was like hands around my throat, a crushing, splintering weight on my breast. There was also a horrible, horrible pressure against my eyes, my poor, dark, dazzled eyes. I was lost in the dark. I no longer knew which way was up and which down. I was vertiginous. I was going to be sick. No. I steadied myself. I found an alignment. Somewhere reaching in the dark. No, I wasn't standing. There didn't seem to be anything to stand on, and I wasn't sure there was any of me to stand with. If my feet had disappeared, then perhaps it wasn't surprising that my eyes, no, my sight, had disappeared too. This wasn't just darkness. This was what came after. This was the beyond dark. And I could only see in the dark. My eyes were still there, or perhaps they were now my non-eyes. I couldn't see with them, and blinking no longer seemed relevant. But the pressure was there. Why was it so difficult to breathe, especially since at the same time breathing seemed as irrelevant as blinking? Why did I want to breathe? What is this? Where was I? I was stretched along some intangible line, a compass needle. Compass needles don't mind the dark, although I doubted I was pointing toward anything like a north that I'd recognize back in the real world. Maybe I'd found where Emil's Cosmail had come from. But where was here? And was there some clue I could take back with me to the world I knew? If I could get back there. Let me do that. If I could get back there. Sorry. I experimented with moving. Moving didn't seem to be an option. It was too much like nothing here, in this non-place, in the beyond dark. Right? Okay, next time I come, I'll organize my question better going in. Next time, presupposing I get out this time alive. I was grateful for the pressure against my eyes. The difficulty breathing made me feel I still existed, somehow, somewhere. I was a magic handler, a stuff changer, ablaze by blood, and lately, by practice, not much practice, but growing all the time. I remembered another sense of alignment when I had changed my little knife to a key. I reached for that sense. No, I reached for my knife. It shouldn't have been there, and I had no fingers to feel for it, but I was suddenly aware of it. I couldn't see it, but I knew that it was a light even in this darkness. And by its invisible light, I could see, feel, hear, smell, live. I heard a rustle, like leaves in a breeze, and for a moment I stood on four slender, firm legs, and I could feel and hear and smell as no human could. Ah! No, what does that mean? And then I was back again. No! Is a wolf or is a weird creep? What is going on? Anyway, then I was back again, sitting in Emil's living room, and her hand was reaching through my powerless fingers and pressing the button. The screen went dark. That was not good, she said. What happened? I was amazed at the sense of my body sitting in the chair, of gravity, of sight, light, twinkly shadows, of fingers on a keyboard, feet against a floor. Vampire senses are different from human in a number of ways. What just happened? Hold on. The leaves laid sun dapples on my brown back as I stood at the edge of the woods with the golden field before me. I raised my black nose to the wind, cupped my big ears forward, and back to listen. Yeek! My human fingers closed on my knife. I was still in Emil's living room. You were gone, said Emil. Not long, 10 seconds or so, just long enough for me to take 2 steps and reach for the button. But your body didn't have you in it. She sat down suddenly on the floor. Do you know where you went? She bowed her head between her knees, and then tipped her face back and looked up at me. Do you know? I shook my head. Experimenting with motion, I remembered the void, the alignment, the other senses. My little knife, my tree, my doe. I wondered when she had accepted the death that she knew she could not escape, if she knew what her death was for, if that could have made any difference, if that was why I touched the knife bulge in my pocket. It felt no different than it ever had. It was set in daylight. If I took it out, it would look like any other pocket knife. The second blade, which I rarely use, would be covered with pocket lint. The first blade, which I used all the time, would need sharpening. Folded up it was, about the length of my middle finger, and a little wider and deeper. It was scraped and gouged by years in a series of pockets, sharing cramped quarters with things like loose change and car keys. And it glowed in the dark, even in the beyond dark of the void. Glowed like a beacon that said, hold on, I've got you here. I felt, carefully, after my experience of nowhere, of beyond dark. Had I brought anything back after all? Anything I could use? Yes, but I didn't know what it was. It wasn't anything so straightforward as a direction. Ah, what? What is it? Oh my god. Not caffeine after that, said Emile, still on the floor. Scotch. She got up on all fours and reached to the little cabinet next to her sofa. Don't even ask me if you want to try again, because the answer is no. I looked at her when she gave me a small, heavy glass with a finger's width of dark amber liquid in it, but the color of the thin wooden plates set into the sides of my little knife. We won't try it again today, I said, but we have to try again. No, we don't, she said. Let Soft figure it out. It's what they're for. If they could figure it out, they wouldn't be asking us. The wars are over, she said. Not exactly, I said after a pause. Didn't Pat tell you? Yes, he told me we'll all be under the dark in 100 years, she said angrily. I know. I slid down to join her on the floor. I felt like a collection of old creaking hinges. I leaned over and put an arm around her. I don't want to know either. After a moment, she said, There have been 2 more dry guys in Old Town this last week. Have you heard about them? Yes. It had been on the news a few days ago. Great stuff to hear when you're driving alone in the dark. Excuse me, and Charlie and Liz had been talking about it when I brought the first tray of cinnamon rolls out front. They had fallen silent. I pretended I hadn't heard anything and toppled the first burning hot roll onto a plate for Mrs. Bielowski. She patted my hand and said, Don't you worry, sweetie. It's not your fault. Because she was Mrs. Bielowski, I almost believed her, but I made the mistake of looking up into her face when I smiled at her and saw the expression in her eyes. Oh. I almost patted her hand back and told her it wasn't her fault either, but it wouldn't have done any good. I guess I wasn't surprised to find out that Mrs. Bielowski wasn't only about litter and rats and flower beds. I wouldn't have joined Soft just because Pat can turn blue, Emile said. Working in a proof classroom gives me asthma, even part-time, or maybe it's just all the guys in khaki. I mean, what's so interesting, too, is I still have no real idea of where this book is, what it's heading to, and what sort of confrontation or revelation. I still don't know. And I'm 58% through it, according to my Kindle. What is going on in this book, Kitty? I went back to Charlie's for the dinner shift, but Charlie took one look at me and said, I'll find someone to cover for you. Go home. I'll go when you find someone, I said, and lasted 2 hours, by which time poor Polly had agreed to give up the rest of his night off after being there all afternoon. Teach him to be glad to escape the 4:30 in the morning shift. I was home by 8:30. It was just full dark. Charlie had sent me home with a bottle of champagne that had a glass and a half left in it. Perfect. I stood on my balcony and drank it and looked into the darkness. The darkness danced. I had had an idea. I didn't like it much, but I had to try it. I went back indoors and unplugged my comp box. Oh boy, it's never quite dark under the sky, and I didn't have curtains for the balcony windows. I took the box under my arm, ducked into my closet, and closed the door. This was real darkness. There wasn't a lot of room in there, but I swept a few shoes aside and sat down. Turned the box on, listened to the resentful hum of the battery. It was an old box. I preferred to run off a wire. The screen came up and asked me if I wanted to enter the GlobeNet. I sat there, staring at the glowing lettering. In the darkness, it didn't flicker at all. It didn't run away into millions of tiny, skittish, dwindling dimensions, like looking into a mirror with one another, or with another one over your shoulder. I read it easily. I liked it even less that my idea had worked. At least I didn't have to use a comm box at Charlie's. It would have been difficult to explain why I needed a closet. Oh God, I hope she's okay. I brought the box back out of the closet and plugged it in on my desk. Not that I invited people home very often, but I was touchy about looking normal, even to myself, now that I was behaving more like Onyx Blaze's daughter. Your comm box on a desk is much more normal than your comm box in a closet. Could my dad see in the dark? Could any of my dad's family? I couldn't remember any of them except my gran. The rest were tall, blurry shapes from my earliest childhood. Emile was right. The Blazes had disappeared during the wars. But I hadn't noticed. I had been busy being my mother's daughter. Even if I wanted to contact them, I had no idea how. And even if we don't even know if they're alive either. I could ask Pat or Jesse. Right after I told them I had a brand new hotline to Vampire World, the new horror theme park. It would blow the ghoul attack simulation at the other museum clean out of the water. It would make the Dragon roller coaster ride at Monster World look like a merry-go-round. Just as soon as we get a few little details worked out, like how you got there and how you get away again. Meanwhile, I still hadn't told them that I could see in the dark. Would I have told them a few days ago if Emile hadn't been there? It was what I'd gone in to tell them. I went back to the balcony. I felt for an alignment. I stood at the edge of the void, but I stood in my world, on my ordinary feet, looking at ordinary darkness with my not quite ordinary eyes. Constantine, Khan, are you there? This time, I was sure I felt that tug on the line, streaming in the dark ether, a coherent pinprick of something in that incoherent nothing, but I lost it again. I was so tired, I was having to prop myself against the railing to stay standing up. So I went indoors and went to bed. Ah, where is he? Where is Constantine? Meanwhile, on other fronts, I was adapting. I usually hit it right the first time when I reached for the spoon or the flour sack or the oven control. I hadn't walked into a door in several days. After the vision had risen like a tide and floated me off my grounding in Old Roy Park, after I'd seen what I'd seen in Maud's face, whether it was there or not, since I could hardly ask her, when the vision subsided and left me standing on solid earth again, some of the dizziness had subsided too. It was as if the dark was a kind of roadmap I'd been folding up wrong, and this time I'd got it right. It would lie flat at last. Although roadmaps didn't generally keep unfolding themselves and flapping at you, saying, "Hey, here, pay attention, you blanker." I thought, it is a roadmap of sorts, but it was about a country I didn't know, labeled in a language I didn't understand, and it didn't unfold so much as erupt. I didn't know if I'd seen what I'd seen in Mrs. Bielowski's face either. The morning she told me not to worry. So which did I like better? That my affinity was growing stronger, that it could pull me out of the human world into some dark alien space, or that I was merely going mad and or had an inoperable brain tumor after all? Did I have a third choice? I worked pretty well straight through that day, got home in time to have a cup of tea in the garden. Yolande's niece and her daughters had left after a 2-week visit, and it was none of my business, but I was secretly delighted to have our garden to ourselves again. Yolande came out and joined me. I watched a few late roses do a kind of waltz with their shadows as a mild evening breeze played with them. Then I watched Yolande. I'd always liked watching her. I wish she could bottle that self-possession so I could have some. It was a little like Mel's, I thought, only without the tattoos. I was feeling tired and mellow and was enjoying this so much it took me a while to realize something strange. Oh no, what now? What now? The shadows lay quietly across Yolande's face. I snapped out of being mellow and stared at her. She saw me looking and smiled. I jerked my eyes away hastily. What? How? Why? What could I ask her? Nothing. I looked at her again. The shadows on her face were quiet, but they went down a long way, like looking into the sky. What did I know about her? She'd inherited this house from some distant relative who had also been childless and felt the spinsters of the world needed to stick together. She'd moved here from Cold Harbor when she retired. I didn't recall she'd ever told me what she retired from. She had that calm, strong centeredness I thought of as ex-teacher, ex-clergy, ex-healer sister or midwife. I couldn't imagine her as someone in a power suit navigating a desk with a comm-box screen the size of a tennis court and a swarm of hot young assistants in an outer office whose haircuts were specially designed to look chic wearing GlobeNet headsets 10 hours a day. I couldn't ask. If she'd wanted to tell me, it would have come up a long time ago. It probably had nothing to do with what she'd done for a living anyway. It was probably like having freckles or curly hair or transmuting ability. You're born with it. But things like transmuting ability tend to lead to other choices. I don't think you've ever told me what you retired from, I blurted out. I was a wards keeper. Wait, what is that? She said easily, as if she was commenting on the pleasantness of the evening, as if my question wasn't entirely rude. Wards keeper. I wanted to laugh. No wonder her house wards were so good. You didn't earn that title easily. There were hundreds of licensed ward crafters, first, second, and third class for every wards keeper. The rank of wards keeper granted an unrestricted authority to design and create any protection against any others that any client wished to hire you for. That's amazing! Even wards keepers had specialties: large business, small business, home, personal bodyguard, and the whole murky business of watchering, which ranged from honest protective surveillance to downright spying. But you didn't get your wards keeper insignia unless you could make a more than competent stab at all of it. Wards keeper. She must then... her own house. But Khan, I realized I'd said the first word aloud. I hoped only the first word because she was answering me. No, I'm not your idea of a wards keeper, am I? She said. I was never anyone's idea. But once I was established, new business came to me by word of mouth. My prior clients usually had the good sense to warn future clients that they were going to meet a drab little old lady. I've been old and drab since my teens, by the way, who gave the impression of being hardly able to cross the road by herself. She looked at me, smiling. I admit that crossing the road alone has never been one of my greater gifts. Cars move much too quickly to suit me, and frequently from unexpected directions. I was always a much better maker of words. I couldn't think how to ask my next question. I couldn't even summon up the spare attention to hoot at the idea of Yolande being drab. Right? She doesn't see it that way. But then she went on, almost as if she was reading my mind. People often are not what one might expect them to be. I would not expect a young, likable, sensible, and sun-worshipping human woman who works in her family. Well, oh shit. Oh shit. I need to read the sentence again. I didn't even finish it. I would not expect a young, likable, sensible, and sun-worshipping human woman who works in her family's restaurant to have a friend who is a vampire. Oh, shit. Then I could say nothing at all, right? Because what do you even say to that? My dear, Yolande said, I have now told you almost as much as I know about your private affairs. Yes, there are more wards about this house and garden than you are aware of, and the fact that you haven't been aware of them is perhaps an indication to me that I have not yet lost my skill. I knew, of course, that a vampire had been visiting, but I also knew that you had not merely invited him in, but that you were under no coercion to do so. A good ward, my friend, or my dear, will also prevent a forced invitation from achieving its object. And my wards are good ones. And this is where I'm ending, because everything she knows! She knows. Oh my god. So is Yulon gonna act as an ally? Like, is Ray gonna have someone she can confide in, or is this gonna back? Oh, Kitty, this book is too much. It is literally too much, and I'm always so excited to read it. And a hello to all of you, Sunshine fans. There are so many of you, and it's lovely. And I'm glad you are always excited when I upload one of these. Anyway, thank you so much, Kitty. You were awesome. See ya.